What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest stars walks onto a morning talk show expecting a normal interview, but instead faces an interrogation that spirals into one of the most shocking on-air clashes in television history? It only took 38 seconds of one question for everything to fall apart, for the cameras to capture a meltdown that would leave viewers speechless, and for a global superstar to do something nobody saw coming. Michael B. Jordan had been everywhere lately. His face was on billboards, his movies were breaking records, and his name was on every casting director's list in Hollywood. So when the Today Show booked him for what was supposed to be a simple promotional interview about his latest film, everyone expected the usual. Some laughs, some clips, maybe a heartwarming story about his journey. Nobody, absolutely nobody, expected what actually went down that morning. The set looked perfect. The lights were positioned just right, creating that warm, inviting glow the show is known for. The famous orange couches were arranged in their usual semicircle, and the studio audience was buzzing with excitement. People had lined up outside Rockefeller Center since dawn, holding signs with Michael's name, hoping for a glimpse of the man who had become one of the most respected actors of his generation. The energy was electric, the kind of anticipation that only comes when someone truly beloved is about to appear. Michael walked out to massive applause. He was dressed sharp but casual, wearing a perfectly tailored navy jacket over a simple white shirt. His smile was genuine as he waved to the crowd, that same charisma that had made him a star radiating off him in waves. He shook hands with Savannah Guthrie, Hoda Kotb, and Craig Melvin, then settled into the couch, ready for what he thought would be a friendly conversation. Savannah started off pleasantly enough. "Michael, welcome back to Today. It is so good to have you here." "Thank you for having me," Michael replied, his voice warm and relaxed. "Always love being here with you all." "Your new film is getting incredible buzz," Hoda chimed in, leaning forward with enthusiasm. "Tell us what drew you to this role." Michael launched into his answer, talking about the character's complexity, the director's vision, and how the story resonated with him personally. He was articulate and passionate, the way he always was when discussing his work. The audience was hanging on every word. Everything seemed to be going exactly as planned. Then Savannah shifted in her seat, and something in her tone changed. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but it was there. A slight edge, a sharpness that hadn't been present moments before. "You know, Michael," she began, her smile not quite reaching her eyes anymore, "there's been a lot of talk about your personal life lately. A lot of attention on who you're dating, where you're going, what you're doing. Some people are saying you're calculated about it all, that you use relationships for publicity. What do you say to that?" The studio went quiet. You could feel the shift in energy, like the air pressure had suddenly changed. Michael's expression flickered, just for a second, a micro-expression of surprise and confusion. He recovered quickly, keeping his composure. "I think that's a pretty unfair characterization," he said carefully, measuring his words. "My personal life is personal. I've always tried to keep a boundary between what I do for work and what I do in my private time. I'm here to talk about the film." "But you understand why people are curious," Savannah pressed, not letting it go. "You're a public figure. You've built your brand on being this perfect guy, the heartthrob, the gentleman, the role model. But is that real? Or is that just another performance?" Michael's jaw tightened slightly. "I'm not a brand. I'm a person. And I don't think being private about my relationships means I'm being fake. It means I'm trying to have a life outside of all this." Craig jumped in, his tone attempting to lighten things up. "I think what Savannah is trying to ask is, how do you balance it all? The fame, the attention, keeping things real?" But before Michael could answer, Savannah spoke again, and this time there was no mistaking the confrontational tone. "Let's be honest, though. You've dated some very high-profile women, actresses, models, influencers, and every time, it's right when you have a movie coming out, right when you need the headlines. That's quite a coincidence, don't you think? The audience gasped. A few people murmured in disbelief. Hoda's eyes went wide, and she glanced at Craig as if to say, "Where is this going?" Michael sat back, his expression hardening. "I'm sorry. What are you implying exactly?" "I'm not implying anything," Savannah said, her voice taking on that particular cadence of someone who absolutely was implying something. "I'm just pointing out a pattern that a lot of people have noticed. You have to admit, the timing is always interesting." "The timing of what?" Michael's voice was calm, but you could hear the frustration building underneath. "The timing of me living my life, the timing of me being a human being who happens to work in an industry that pays attention to everything I do, the timing of your very public relationships coinciding with your promotional tours," Savannah shot back. "Come on, Michael. We're all adults here. This is how Hollywood works, isn't it? Create a narrative, get people talking, sell more tickets." Hoda tried to intervene. "Okay, maybe we should talk about the film itself." "Michael, the action sequences in this movie are supposed to be incredible." But Michael wasn't ready to move on. His eyes were locked on Savannah now, and the friendly, relaxed demeanor he'd walked out with was completely gone. "No, let's stay on this for a second, because I want to understand what you're actually saying to me right now. You're sitting here on national television accusing me of using women for publicity. Is that right? Is that what you're doing?" "I'm asking you a question that I think our viewers want answered," Savannah replied, her tone defensive now, as if she was the one being attacked. "I think it's a fair question. You're in the public eye. You make millions of dollars because people care about you, about your life. So yes, I think it's fair to ask if what we see is real or manufactured. What you see is a person trying to do his job," Michael said, his voice rising slightly. "What you see is someone who works hard, who cares about his craft, who tries to be respectful and professional. And what you're doing right now is disrespectful. Not just to me, but to the women you're talking about. You're reducing them to props in some conspiracy theory you've made up in your head." Craig cleared his throat, attempting again to redirect. "Michael makes a good point. These are real people we're talking about. Real relationships." But Savannah wasn't backing down. If anything, she seemed emboldened by Michael's reaction, as if his frustration validated her line of questioning. Real relationships that seem to end right after the promotional cycle ends. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." "You're not saying what everyone's thinking," Michael countered, his voice firm. "You're projecting. You're making assumptions. And you're doing it based on what? Tabloid rumors? TMZ articles? You don't know anything about my personal life. You don't know what goes on behind closed doors, what's real and what's not. But you're sitting here acting like you have some kind of insider knowledge, some kind of authority to judge me." The tension was unbearable now. The audience sat in stunned silence, not sure whether to applaud, gasp, or just watch in horrified fascination. The cameramen kept shooting, capturing every moment of this unraveling interview. The producers in the control room were probably losing their minds, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let it play out. Hoda made another attempt to salvage things. "Why don't we take a quick break, and when we come back, we can look at some clips from the movie?" "No," Savannah said, holding up a hand. "I think we need to finish this conversation. Michael, I'm not trying to attack you. I'm trying to have an honest discussion about celebrity culture, about authenticity, about what's real in Hollywood." "By accusing me of being fake?" Michael shot back. "By suggesting that my relationships are stunts? That's your idea of an honest discussion?" "I'm suggesting that maybe you're not as genuine as you want people to believe," Savannah said, and there it was. The mask was fully off now. Whatever pretense of journalistic inquiry she'd been hiding behind was gone. I'm suggesting that maybe this nice guy image is exactly that, an image, and maybe people deserve to know the truth. Michael stared at her for a long moment, and you could see him processing, deciding how to respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but intense. You don't get to decide what's true about my life. You don't get to sit there and tell me who I am. I've been nothing but respectful to you, to this show, to everyone I work with. I show up. I do my job. I treat people with dignity. And this is what I get? This is what passes for journalism now? Baseless accusations and personal attacks disguised as questions? I'm just doing my job, Savannah said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. I'm asking the tough questions. That's what a journalist does. A journalist deals in facts, Michael replied. What you're dealing in is gossip and innuendo. There's a difference. And honestly, I expected better from the Today Show. I expected better from you. Craig tried once more to intervene. Let's all just take a breath here. Things are getting a little heated. No, Craig, it's fine, Michael said, his eyes never leaving Savannah. I think we all need to hear this. I think it's important that people understand what just happened here. I came on this show in good faith. I came here to talk about a project I'm proud of, a film that meant something to me, that I poured my heart into. And instead of talking about that, instead of having a real conversation about the work, I got ambushed with tabloid nonsense. Nobody ambushed you, Savannah protested. You're being overly sensitive. Overly sensitive, Michael repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. That's interesting. So now I'm sensitive for not wanting to be accused of manipulating women? I'm sensitive for expecting basic respect? Hoda reached over and touched Savannah's arm, a subtle gesture that said, "Please stop." But Savannah either didn't notice or didn't care. She pressed forward, her voice growing more agitated. You know what? Maybe you are too sensitive. Maybe that's the problem. You've been coddled by Hollywood, surrounded by yes people, told you're perfect for so long that you can't handle anyone questioning you. Questioning me about what? Michael's voice was louder now, the frustration finally boiling over. About things that aren't true, about my character. You don't question someone by making up narratives. You don't question someone by attacking their integrity. I haven't attacked anything, Savannah insisted, but her body language told a different story. She was leaning forward aggressively, her face flushed, her voice strained. I asked legitimate questions about your public behavior. My public behavior? Michael's laugh was bitter. I go to work. I promote my films. I try to live my life. That's my public behavior. And somehow, you've turned that into some kind of scandal. Some kind of scheme. Do you hear yourself right now? Do you hear how ridiculous this sounds? The other panelists looked deeply uncomfortable. Hoda was biting her lip, her eyes darting between Michael and Savannah. Craig was shifting in his seat, clearly wanting to be anywhere else, but neither of them seemed willing or able to stop what was happening. Savannah's voice took on a condescending tone, the kind of tone you use when you think you're explaining something simple to someone who's just not getting it. Michael, in this business, image is everything. We both know that, and I think you've cultivated a very specific image. The good guy. The guy who does everything right. But nobody's perfect, and I think people are starting to see through it. See through what? Michael demanded. See through me being a decent person. See through me trying to have a career and a life. What exactly are they seeing through, Savannah? Please enlighten me. They're seeing through the facade, she said, her voice sharp. They're seeing that maybe you're not as authentic as you claim to be. That maybe there's a calculation behind everything you do. Michael stood up abruptly. The sudden movement made everyone flinch. The audience audibly gasped. For a moment, nobody knew what was going to happen next. He looked down at Savannah, then at Hoda and Craig, then back at Savannah. His jaw was clenched, his hands balled into fists at his sides, not in aggression, but in pure frustration. You know what's calculated? He said, his voice dangerously quiet. This interview. This whole setup. You brought me here under false pretenses. You told my team this was about the film. You told them it would be a positive, fun segment. And instead, you used it as an opportunity to take shots at me, to try to tear me down, to create some kind of viral moment for your show. That's calculated. That's manipulative. And that's disappointing. I don't have to sit here and listen to this, Savannah said, standing up as well. I don't have to be spoken to this way. And I don't have to be accused of things that aren't true, Michael shot back. But here we are. Craig stood up too, holding his hands out in a placating gesture. Okay, everyone, let's just calm down. This doesn't have to escalate. It already escalated, Michael said, looking at Craig. The moment she decided to turn this interview into an attack, it escalated. And I'm not going to sit here and be disrespected. I'm not going to smile and nod while someone questions my character, my relationships, my entire life, based on absolutely nothing. Hoda finally found her voice, standing as well. Michael, please. We can work this out. Let's take a break. Reset. Start over. Start over? Michael looked at her incredulously. And do what? Pretend that didn't just happen? Pretend that she didn't just spend 10 minutes trying to paint me as some kind of con artist? No. I'm good. I'm done. You're done? Savannah's voice was dripping with contempt now. So, you're just going to walk off? You're going to throw a tantrum and leave? I'm not throwing a tantrum, Michael said, his voice steady despite the anger clearly coursing through him. I'm making a choice. I'm choosing not to participate in whatever this is. I'm choosing to respect myself enough to walk away from a situation where I'm clearly not respected. This is unbelievable, Savannah muttered, shaking her head. This is so unprofessional. Unprofessional? Michael's eyes widened. You want to talk about unprofessional? You ambushed a guest with personal attacks. You made accusations without evidence. You turned what should have been a simple interview into a circus. And I'm the unprofessional one? That's rich. The studio audience was completely silent now, watching this unfold like it was a car crash they couldn't look away from. Some people had their phones out, recording. Others just sat there with their mouths open, unable to process what they were witnessing. This wasn't supposed to happen on morning television. This wasn't supposed to happen on the Today Show. Craig made one last attempt at diplomacy. Michael, man, I get it. I get that you're upset. But maybe we can find a way to end this on a better note. For everyone. Michael looked at Craig for a long moment, and you could see the conflict in his eyes. Part of him wanted to be reasonable, to de-escalate, to smooth things over. But the larger part, the part that had just been publicly attacked for no reason, wasn't willing to let it go that easily. Craig, I respect you, Michael said quietly. I respect Hoda. I've always enjoyed coming on this show, but I can't respect what just happened here. And I can't sit here and pretend it's okay. It's not okay. It's not okay to treat people like this. It's not okay to use your platform to tear someone down, and I won't be part of it. Savannah crossed her arms, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. So you're really going to walk off. You're really going to do this. I'm really going to do this, Michael confirmed. He turned to the audience, his expression softening slightly. I'm sorry you all had to see this. I'm sorry this turned into what it turned into. You came here for something fun, something positive, and instead you got, well, this. That's not fair to you, but I hope you understand why I can't stay. Then he turned back to Savannah one final time. I hope whatever you were trying to accomplish here was worth it. I hope the ratings boost or the viral clip or whatever you were going for makes up for what you just did to your credibility. Because that's what you sacrificed today. Not my reputation, not my career. Your credibility as a journalist. Think about that. He reached down, unclipped his microphone, and set it carefully on the couch. The small gesture felt enormous in the moment, final and definitive. This wasn't a pause or a break. This was an ending. Hoda stepped forward, her voice pleading. "Michael, please don't go like this." But Michael was already moving toward the edge of the set. He gave Hoda a small, sad smile. "I'm sorry, Hoda. I really am. But I have to." The walk from the couch to the exit felt like it took forever. Every step Michael took was captured by multiple cameras. His face was set, determined, but you could see the hurt underneath the anger. This wasn't what he wanted. This wasn't how he wanted things to go. But he'd been backed into a corner, forced to choose between his dignity and his politeness, and he'd chosen dignity. Savannah called after him, her voice shrill now, desperate. "You're making a huge mistake. You're walking away from millions of viewers, from your fans." Michael stopped at the edge of the set and turned back one last time. "My fans will understand. They know who I am. They've seen my work. They've seen how I treat people. They don't need you to tell them who I am, and neither do I." The audience erupted. Some people applauded. Others gasped. A few shouted encouragement. The whole studio was in chaos, the carefully controlled environment of morning television completely shattered. Producers were rushing onto the set, trying to figure out what to do. Camera operators kept filming, capturing every second of the mayhem. This was live television at its most raw, most unfiltered. Craig put his head in his hands. Hoda looked like she might cry. And Savannah stood there, in the middle of it all. Her arms still crossed, her expression defiant, but with something else creeping in around the edges. Realization, maybe. The dawning awareness that she'd pushed too far, that this hadn't gone the way she'd planned. Michael B. Jordan walked off the Today Show set, past the cameras, past the crew, past the confused and shocked faces of everyone who worked there. He walked out with his head high, his dignity intact, refusing to compromise himself for the sake of politeness or professionalism or whatever excuse people might use to justify staying in a toxic situation. The cameras stayed on the empty couch for what felt like an eternity. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew how to move forward. Savannah finally sat back down, smoothing her dress, trying to regain some composure. "Well," she said, her voice forced and brittle, "that certainly wasn't what we expected." "No," Hoda said quietly, "it wasn't." Craig just shook his head, staring at the spot where Michael had been sitting moments before. The audience was still buzzing, people talking to each other, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. This wasn't entertainment. This wasn't fun television drama. This was real. This was raw. This was a man reaching his breaking point and refusing to break. The segment producer's voice crackled through someone's earpiece, probably telling them to go to commercial, to cut away, to do something to stop the bleeding. But it was too late. The damage was done. The moment was captured, and there was no taking it back. Savannah attempted to address the camera, to salvage something from the wreckage. We'll be right back after this break." But her voice lacked conviction. She knew, everyone knew, that nothing would be the same after this. You can't unring a bell. You can't unsay words. You can't undo the kind of confrontation that had just played out for millions of people to see. In the hallway backstage, Michael was surrounded by his team. His publicist was on the phone, already doing damage control. His manager was talking rapidly, trying to understand what had happened. But Michael himself was calm. Calmer than he'd been on the couch. Certainly calmer than anyone expected him to be after what had just transpired. "I'm good," he told them. "I know that looked bad, but I'm good. I did what I had to do." His publicist covered the phone with her hand. "Michael, do you understand what just happened? You walked off the Today Show. That's going to be everywhere. Let it be everywhere, Michael said simply. Let people see what happened. Let them see how I was treated and how I responded. I'm not ashamed of standing up for myself. I'm not ashamed of walking away from disrespect. And if that makes me difficult or unprofessional in people's eyes, then so be it. I'd rather be difficult than be a doormat. Back in the studio, as the show cut to commercial, the audience was still buzzing. People were pulling out their phones, texting friends, posting on social media. Within minutes, clips would be circulating. Within hours, it would be the top trending topic. Everyone would have an opinion. Everyone would pick a side. But in that moment, in the immediate aftermath, one thing was crystal clear to everyone who had witnessed it. Michael B. Jordan had been brought onto that show expecting a normal interview, a friendly conversation, a chance to promote his work. Instead, he'd been subjected to a barrage of personal attacks, baseless accusations, and thinly veiled insults. And rather than sit there and take it, rather than play along with whatever game Savannah Guthrie thought she was playing, he'd chosen to leave. He'd chosen himself. He'd chosen his dignity. He'd chosen to draw a line and say, this far, no further. And that choice, that moment of standing up and walking away, would resonate far beyond the walls of that studio. It would spark conversations about how we treat celebrities, about the line between journalism and gossip, about respect and professionalism, and what we're willing to tolerate in the name of entertainment. The commercial break seemed to last forever. In the control room, executives were probably having emergency meetings. On the set, the remaining hosts were probably trying to figure out how to proceed. And somewhere in the building, Michael B. Jordan was probably taking off his guest badge, getting his belongings, and preparing to step out into a world that was about to see him in a completely different light. Not as the smooth, unflappable movie star, not as the carefully managed public figure, but as a human being who had reached his limit, who had been pushed too far, and who had decided that some things, his self-respect, his dignity, his refusal to be disrespected, were worth more than any promotional opportunity. The irony was thick. Savannah had accused him of being calculated, of being fake, of presenting an image that wasn't real. And in doing so, she'd provoked a response that was the most real, most authentic thing that had happened on that show in years. She'd wanted to see behind the mask, and she'd gotten exactly that. Just not in the way she'd expected, because what she'd found behind the polished exterior wasn't a con artist, or a manipulator, or someone playing games. What she'd found was a man with principles, with boundaries, with a clear sense of who he was and what he wouldn't tolerate. And that man had looked at the situation, weighed his options, and made a choice that most people in his position would have been too afraid to make. He'd walked away. He'd put his career, his image, his relationship with one of the biggest morning shows in America on the line. And he'd done it without hesitation, without second guessing, without the careful calculation she'd accused him of. He'd done it because it was the right thing to do. Because sometimes the right thing to do is to simply refuse to participate in your own degradation. As the commercial break ended and the show came back, you could see the strain on everyone's faces. Hoda attempted a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Craig looked subdued, uncomfortable. And Savannah looked like someone who was realizing, perhaps too late, that she'd made a terrible mistake. They tried to continue with the show, to move on to the next segment as if nothing had happened, but the energy was wrong. The audience was distracted. The hosts were off their game. Everything felt hollow and forced because everyone knew that what had just happened was the real story. Everything else was just filler, just going through the motions, just trying to pretend that the world hadn't shifted on its axis in the span of a 10-minute interview gone horribly wrong. And Michael B. Jordan, the man who had started the morning thinking he was just going to talk about his movie, was now the man who had stood up to one of the most powerful platforms in morning television. The man who had said no. The man who had walked away. The man who had chosen himself over the machine. Dignity over diplomacy. Truth over tolerance of the intolerable. That was the story. That was the moment. And that was what people would remember long after the details faded and the specifics blurred. They would remember the day Michael B. Jordan said enough, got up, and walked out, leaving behind nothing but an empty couch, a stunned audience, and a host who had learned, in the most public way possible, that there are consequences to disrespect.